Hello everyone. So thank you for attending today's presentation. So today we'll be covering how to design personalized campaigns with Sitecore. Not going to talk about ourselves. Most of the people on the call are quite familiar who we are as an agency. We're obviously a Ratio or a Sitecore partner. We basically help clients get the most out of the marketing functionality within Sitecore. Don't want to talk about too much about us. Really want today to be focused around the content and try and make it as useful and practical as possible. So some of the things we're going to cover today, what we'd like for you to take away at the end of today's presentation is a sort of an outline framework that you could take back to your own organizations if you're looking to deploy deploy personalization on a non-Sitecore platform. So for example, a lot of the stuff we'll be talking about will be abstracted from technology, the planning, what you need to put in place first in order to create the right type of approach to delivering personalization across your campaigns and also your website. And then the second part will be delving into more of the Sitecore side, so how to map the planning and strategy side to some of the functionality within Sitecore. So today's presentation is going to be split up into two distinct parts. We'll probably be mentioning a workshop every now and then throughout the presentation, so I'll just quickly talk about it now. A lot of the content we're running through today will be going into a lot more detail during a workshop we're running next week. The URL's on the bottom of the screen, but basically we'll be looking to go into far more detail than we could on a 30-45 minute webinar. So it really breaks down to two stages. The reason why I mentioned today's presentation is going to go into two distinct phases is because if you're looking to deploy personalization, you need to split out the two. A lot of people, a lot of clients we deal with who are really fascinated and excited about deploying personalization are really keen to get stuck in, go on to, for example, their homepage and create a personalization rule. And that's great. It's great to deploy something and see it actually live on your website. But actually to create something that's going to drive optimal value for your digital campaigns and across each of your touch points over time. And when we say value, we are normally thinking about sort of your business goals. If it's trying to acquire new members, driving new revenue, driving leads, etc. We need to look at stage one. And stage one is, what does the strategy look like? What planning do we need to put in place? What team members do we have? Do we have the right data points? If we have the right data points, have we looked into the data correctly? Have we extracted insights, etc.? And that's what we'll be talking about during stage one. And during stage two, my colleague Phil Scott will be taking over the presentation duties, and he'll be running through some of the ways the Sitecore marketing platform can help you deploy the strategy you would have created during the stage one, the initial planning stage. So what's a personalized campaign and what does it look like? Well, when we talk about campaigns, we as an agency are referring to your efforts as an organization. So everyone's on the call today's efforts to generate awareness of your companies, the organizations you work for. And the reason why we're talking about campaigns today, and we're not necessarily talking about websites. So everything we're talking about today can be deployed from a campaign to your website, is because when you look at your website, you have different traffic sources, you could have dozens of different segments, different personas, whereas if you're looking to launch a digital campaign, it's just one thin layer. You may be targeting just one persona group, one target audience. So looking to deploy the techniques of a personalized campaign throughout each touch point of this, it gives you a great basis of lifting and shifting that approach and applying it to your website at a later stage. So when we refer to a personalized campaign, we're thinking about understanding what is driving traffic to your website. So after today's presentation, I would, if you wanted to look at where you should start, have a look at your Google Analytics or Omnichannel, or whatever web analytics tool you're using. Try to understand what visits come to the website. Are you able to bucket them into different segments? Are you able to track people coming from certain sectors, account-based marketing? Is people interacting with you at time of day important? Something which comes up quite often for some of our retail customers. Looking to bucket people by the type of content they're downloading or specific campaigns such as PPC campaigns you may be running. It's about trying to understand the context of each visit to your website. And when we look about personalization, what is the next step? So looking at the traffic sources and then looking at what URL are people being driven to. So whether that's your homepage on your website, whether that's a specific landing page or a series of interconnected pages, it's just looking at those pages and trying to understand the context of that visit, and then moving away from just a delivering sort of, in effect, a one-size-fits-all website or landing page where it's the same experience irrespective of context. And what we'd like to do is move towards more of the Amazonian model of tailoring each experience based on what we know. So if we understand that people come in from different segments based on time of day, and that's important, are we able to tailor the image, the colors, etc., even the CTAs based on what we know about them? There's a couple of key areas to build in a relevancy plan. So you're looking to build a relevant personalization plan. Everything starts with data, and data can sound kind of a scary subject, but really it's just looking at your data, whether it's held offline in systems like CRM systems or e-commerce platforms, or for most of the customers we deal with, they'll be looking at their web analytics and trying to identify the most important data layer. So try to understand from a business who your customers are, and then marry them up with the segments which are visiting your site and identifying those unique identifiers. So as we mentioned before, applying context, so discovering context. Is it based on certain accounts? Is it based on geography? Some organizations are keen to target based on country, based on specific postcode, based on region within the United Kingdom. If that's something which is important, let's try and identify and match that against the data that you are currently collecting. If you're not collecting it, then let's try and understand how we can better collect the right data, because that will allow us to build a relevant personalization plan. And that's really sort of the foundation layer of everything that we've been talking about today. The data is one side. The other side is optimizing your page. So we're talking about campaigns, which could refer to just a standalone landing page for a campaign, or it could just be referring to your web pages within your overall organization's website. But it's about looking at the different components within the site, within each page, whether it's header banners, whether it's forms, the specific CTAs, the buttons. Every component within the page can be set up in such a way that we have the option, again, we'll be talking about Sitecore later on in the presentation, how we can physically do it, of swapping out components based on that initial context. So the type of campaign that someone's clicked on from Google, for example, and is driven to a landing page. If we know something about them, sort of the keywords, the search phrases example, can we optimize and personalize different components? It's about making the headlines clear, matching visitor expectations. And this is something that's come up actually quite recently. We're running a PPC campaign for an insurance company, for example, where we have 15, 20 different ads. Each ad has different search terms. So an individual is typing a search term into Google, is clicking on a relevant ad, and their expectation is founded in their initial search term they put into Google, and also the ad they clicked on. Now, when it comes to landing page, we might be running 15, 20 different campaigns with different search phrases, different ads and different copy. But do we want to be presenting the same headline to each visit? Probably not. So it's about understanding the search terms, the context of that visit, building it into your personalization plan, building it into the rules to make your headlines, your CTA clear, concise, but also relevant to the initial visit. So why should we bother trying to deploy personalization across any part of our digital endeavors? Well, looking at the bad side, if you're concerned about your conversions dropping off, customers complaining about the experience, etc., applying digital personalization is one technique. We're not going to pretend that personalization is the cure to every digital problem, because it's not. It's one technique in the digital arsenal that you have as a client-side marketer to deliver a better experience for your end users and to drive value for your organization over time. But as a technique, if you're concerned about increasing conversions, delivering a better experience, it's a way of moving into the good side of understanding those risks, understanding the bad side, and building something better for the future. So how can we build a better experience for our clients based on what we know? How can we make each individual visit as relevant as humanly possible based on who they are and where they are in their journey with you as a brand? And how can we move towards proving the value of digital over time by building attribution into how we approach digital marketing by applying measurable outcomes to each part of your personalization plan, so it's measurable, so we can optimize, but also we can use it to build up towards a model of, can we use this to increase conversions over the longer term? Potentially, any sort of personalization project can be initially daunting or quite complex. So we've broken it down. We have our own sort of a wheel of personalization death. But basically, it's a way of, if you're looking to go away, of breaking down what could be seen as something quite complex into more manageable chunks. And we'll be talking about this throughout the presentation, but I'll just briefly cover some of the items. So extracted insight from analytics, as we say, everything comes from data, but then how do you use that data to define segments? Now, the end goal is to personalize for each individual visit, but initially that's not what you're going to be doing, because it's quite difficult to create personalization rules of scale from 0 to personalizing for 100,000 visits each month. So initially what we probably look to do is define larger segments that we can create a personalized approach against, and over time we can become more sophisticated and granular and go down into more nitty-gritty targeting. Combining web and email, we'll be talking about that later on. Yes, personalization involves targeting and creating a relevant experience on your front-end website, on your landing pages, but let's not forget, for the majority of organizations, email is still an incredibly important tool. So we're talking about how email has an important part to play in this process. And mapping everything to content, obviously, personalization is presenting something that's relevant. How we set up your web pages for personalization, so that's some of the design, some of the Sitecore side, tracking digital interaction, so measurable goals, creating and attaching points-based goals to items, etc., and some of the design changes that you could do to improve conversion over time. So interrogate your data. Now, your data will sit across a number of different tools, and so we always recommend that take a sort of a holistic view of where your customer data is held. Don't just zero in on, say, the web analytics side, though it's a great place to start, normally because it's set up, it's the easiest thing for you to do. But if you have tools like heat mapping, eye tracking, if you're running lots of customer surveys, basically look at a cross section of the customer data you're collecting and look to interrogate it in order to dive into building segments. Now, I've got a couple of examples on screen because segments can sound as a sort of a fluffy phrase. So I've created a couple of examples which come up on a regular basis with organizations that we deal with and work with. So when we say what we mean by segments is, if something like geo-targeting is important to you, if something along the lines of search keywords, if you run a lot of paid campaigns, if you're collecting explicit data, for example, if you're a retailer or a membership organization or some organization that has purchases on site, you're collecting known identifiable information. If you're interested, or as an organization you run a sort of an account-based sales strategy, that could be a segment. But basically is when you look into your data, it's matching what is important for you as a business. If it's account-based targeting, okay, does our data tell us anything about certain organizations or sectors visiting our website and the geographies they are, or the search keywords they use to come to our site, and building these into segment plans, and then we can then build the messaging, the personalization approach, identify the pages, the landing pages, all that sort of stuff comes afterwards. Without identifying those segments, it's quite difficult to know what to personalize for and who. Closing the loop between web and email. So we've picked out email. For some clients, it might be a combination of social and web. The reason we say email is that for the majority of people we work with, email is still their sort of their number one digital technique for driving value, driving engagement with their end clients. And the reason why we say closing the loop between web and email is that for a lot of organizations which do a lot of email marketing, there can be a disconnect between your email marketing tool and your web platform. So if you're using something like Sitecore, a lot of people just tend to use Sitecore for its online marketing functionality processes, and invariably do not use sort of the email tool within the platform. They will use something like a campaign monitor or an Eloqua. So it's about how do we connect email data with your website. So for example, if you do use a third-party email tool such as MailChimp or .mailer, it doesn't necessarily have to sit outside your Sitecore platform. Can we integrate those data points within Sitecore? So we're collecting that data within the X profile, for example. So that way we're collecting more a holistic data set of how an individual interacts across your website, but also how they interact with your email tools. Reason why it's important is we have a richer data set to dive into understanding how your segments are interacting with you as an organization. And it just means that we have more information and more data when we're looking to create a more relevant personalization plan to optimizing your campaigns. And content. I didn't want to go into incredible detail on sort of the content strategy because, to be honest with you, we could create an entire presentation on this. It's quite an in-depth subject, and we'll be going through this topic in a bit more detail during a workshop we'll be running next week. But content's important. So for a lot of clients we talk to, one of the fear factors around personalization is the fear you will need to create lots and lots of content. And that's not necessarily the case. The case is, well, the reality is that most organizations have created a lot of content in the past. You may be creating more content in the future. The power of personalization is to be more efficient and clever with what you've already created. So it's about running an audit on what you've already have. So not necessarily going back to the business and building a business case for another 5, 10, 20,000 pounds to create more content. It's about auditing what you have and understanding what content you have is relevant for those segments that we've spent so much time analyzing at the beginning. Because once we've identified that content, and that could be as simple as different messaging, different headlines, right through to different imagery that's relevant for different segments, right through to videos and ebooks, etc. But looking at what you already have, matching it against those segments, and then we can begin to build those into your content strategy arsenal for deploying across your sort of different personalized scenarios. So some of the practicalities. If you're looking to build your website and your landing page with a personalization first approach, basics, have a look at your existing landing pages and your website pages and determine, are they component based? And by components, have a look at the page, and has each section been broken up into individual sections? It's important because it enables you to, when you create personalization rules, switch out different components, different banners, different forms, etc., for different versions based on the visit coming to your site. And from a Sitecore perspective, I've got a quick screenshot on screen. So if you are a user of Sitecore, it's very easy. You can have a look at your existing Sitecore website to determine if your individual web pages have been built with components. If they haven't, and we see it actually on a sometimes too often, where web pages have been built as a single component, then you will actually need to re-architect your pages. So have a quick look, see if they've been built as components. If they are, at least you know you're part of the way towards building a personalization first approach to optimizing your pages. So how do we roll out the process? So if you're looking to design and roll out a personalized campaign, there's a couple of key areas. One, We talk about segments. Another part of segments is to look at the customer life cycle. So if you are, which is actually, if you're collecting data within your .mailer or CRM tools, you might have an overview of whether a visit to your website or someone who you're emailing on a regular basis is someone who's a prospect or an existing customer or a lapsed customer. We might want to treat them differently and build a separate personalization plan around those individuals. But at a basic level, if you want to create a personalized campaign, what we want to do is add tracking codes, specifically Sitecore tracking codes. You can also append Google UTM codes. Phil will be talking a little bit more about Sitecore tracking codes later on, but the reason why we add these is it creates the base level of collecting the right data, which feeds into getting a foundation layer. So we've talked about on past presentations, and we'll talk about it time and time again. The foundation layer is key. So creating those Sitecore goals and events. So if you're familiar with setting up events in Google Analytics, something relatively similar applied to your Sitecore website. It just enables us to contextually apply a value-based system to each visit and each content item across your website. So then we can measure, we can deploy different sort of personalization rules when goals get triggered, etc. You want to be tracking your inbound marketing channels and feeding into building those optimized landing pages. So as we said before, is your page optimized for personalization? Is it component driven? Look at your headlines, look at your CTAs, look at making them as clear and concise as possible. And design those content journeys. So we talk about those segments beforehand, and each segment could have its own personalization plan for each one. So taking account-based marketing, for example, if your sales strategy is to target the top 50 banks globally, let's design the on-site content journey for those individual accounts that you'll be targeting. What content's relevant, what URLs, what pages are important for them, and let's build those touch points into the plan. Define the campaign measurement points, and we want to move beyond bounce rates, for example, towards understanding what is truly important from a business side and mapping those against digital. So what truly drives value for the business online, and let's build those in as measurement points for the campaign, because that will feed into defining those reporting metrics. And something we get asked on a regular basis is how does this look? What's the sort of structure? So I've put together a sort of typical plan that, again, it varies for different organizations, but to give you an idea that if you were to go and do this yourself, what it could look like. It's not about looking to do everything day one. You won't do everything even in month 1 or month 3, but it's about understanding where you are today as an organization, where you'd like to be, and working backwards. So if your objective is to deliver a really granular personalization approach for new customers or for existing customers, let's take a step back. Let's understand what's important to the business. Let's look at what are the business goals. Let's map those to your digital goals. Let's understand whether you're collecting the right data. If we don't have the right data collected, why is that? Do we need to connect systems? Do we need to set up analytics correctly? And then building it into a plan over a longer period, because that way we can set milestones. It's something you can then prove to the value of to the business, because you have milestones built in at each stage to say, this is what we promised, this is what we delivered against plan. Well, that's me. I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Phil, who's going to be talking about how we map some of this to the Sitecore functionality.
Thanks, Mario. It's really technologically advanced here, guys. We're just handing over some headphones, so hopefully you can hear me okay. Really good stuff from Mario. As Mario mentioned, I'm going to be spending a bit of time here looking at how some of what Mario showed in terms of planning can be abstracted from technology, but I'm trying to now bring it back to Sitecore. Sitecore is where we live, it's where we specialize, and it's where hopefully everyone on the webinar today is going to be working with the platform and looking to get more out of it as well. It feels like in this next slide, I spend most of my life talking through what is called the layer model and the wheel of functionality, we refer to them as. But today, these are probably two of the best images I've found of articulating what the Sitecore platform is and coherently explaining what it can do from a marketing point of view. So the first kind of recommendation when looking at running end-to-end campaigns within Sitecore, or even just using a lot more of the functionality with Sitecore, is embedding this within the organization and making sure that everyone understands the various points of the platform and how it strings together, and what some of the capabilities are. We actually spend occasionally with some of our large customers a bit of time doing technology mapping, so saying that Sitecore is one piece of the puzzle. And Mario mentioned about using Dotmailer, Eloqua, even into CRM systems and some big data collection systems as well, and then working out from there what technology stack do we have within the organization, how do the various features of each tie into what we're trying to achieve strategically. So I do recommend this sort of sits on the wall of every office, and you understand a bit more about it. We've run a number of sessions in the past that cover this, and we're quite happy to come out and do a bit more with people. So one of the first points that Mario made in terms of planning it end-to-end campaign management within platforms and within Sitecore, we need to really gather the data before we can interrogate it. And we spend an awful lot of time working with customers to understand what their data strategy looks like within the Sitecore platform, defining what kind of goals or page events might sit across their site, how they feed into the overall strategy, where they should be deployed, can they be done out of the box, are they done programmatically at a code level, and so forth. And then defining what an engagement scale looks like assigned to each of those. There is a bit of work there to define what all this means, but without that in place, that data foundation, so to speak, within Sitecore, a lot of the insight tools in order that we can interrogate to inform our campaigns become relatively irrelevant. When we talk about things like the engagement analytics dashboards, path analyzer, A/B testing, everything like that, it largely becomes irrelevant because we don't have these goals and engagement values in place within Sitecore. So we've run a number of webinars and workshops on this in the past. I encourage you to go and have a look at them, watch them, get in touch with us as well as to how you can start to map that out. But without that in place, we start to struggle to manage campaigns. So when we start to then look at interrogating the data, what do we actually mean by this? What I mean when I say this quote up the top is you own the data in Sitecore. How you interrogate it is up to you. That kind of the power is in your hands. What I mean by this is that the data within Sitecore is just a database. Yes, we have a number of different UIs in which we can project that to the business through dashboards, through insight tools, whatever else we have within Sitecore. But ultimately, it's just a database. So if you have specific requirements in how you want to interrogate it and complex ones, you can just query it. You can just write a query direct to the database and pull it out into a BI tool if you're particularly mature, or perhaps even in the past, as we've done with some customers, is just exporting it into a sort of spreadsheet, a data sheet somewhere. So if those UIs that Sitecore do offer don't match up to what you need in order to interrogate it properly, the data is still there. If we have the foundation in place, just query it directly, build out your own reports, and do it that way. But there are some interesting UIs that we can interrogate, and this is trying to take a different spin on some of the content that we would have put together before and have run through, and you've probably been hearing since version 8 came out of Sitecore. By the way, we're at version 8.2, update 4 at the moment, with 9 just around the corner. But there are some aspects of the various UIs that we can use to interrogate the data and inform some of the planning and creation of our campaigns that we're running. We start off, first port of call really is the experience profile, and our guy Alfie Blake here. This is very much looking at the database, the experience database from an individual level. How much information we get again from the experience profile for planning campaigns. It's very easy to lose focus, and Mario mentioned that when we are interrogating data, it's imperative that we have focus on what we're trying to understand. The experience profile is largely used to look at an individual. So unless you are doing personalization at scale and you're at that level of maturity and going down, you probably won't spend an awful lot of time in here. Or perhaps you're in a type of business where you're doing account-based targeting to an individual, or perhaps it's an annual high net worth purchase. Then maybe you will spend time looking at an individual record within the experience profile. When we move up to some of the dashboard capabilities in Sitecore, these are actually pretty good. GA tends to be embedded in most organizations, or like Marion mentioned earlier, that they're using Omniture or Web Trends or whatever it might be for data analysis. But the experience dashboard does give us something slightly different. And from a campaign point of view, when we are looking to sort of plan out who we should be targeting and what our segments are, it can be very useful as well, because it's here where we'll start to see what kind of patterns, and by patterns we're looking at the profile capabilities in Sitecore. Do we have specific profiles that are driving relatively high value to the website or relatively low value? Is there a profile or a type of user that we should be campaigning to increase their value? Do we want to take them on a slightly different journey, for example? So this level of insight is quite powerful from the dashboards, and it's often overlooked, largely because the data foundation isn't correctly implemented. The second picture we've got there is around geolocation. Again, Mario mentioned about a segment not necessarily being a group of individuals, but actually a group of user type. And here we would look at something like geolocation. If we're a UK-based company, are we converting less people in the north of England than we are around the London area? Should we be targeting campaigns to those specific users? Can we start to then utilize things like personalization to increase the value that's being driven by those people through campaigns? And finally, Path Analyzer. Path Analyzer gets overlooked a little bit because it is, you might have seen Sitecore demos, you might have even seen it on your own implementations, but it's that big spider diagram that feels really disorientating and difficult to digest. But where the real power comes within Path Analyzer for interrogating the data that we have within Sitecore is actually in the filtering mechanism. If we have everything collected correctly, and we are able to have things like profiles set up, we have got our goal strategy deployed, we have got engagement value, perhaps we've run some campaigns previously ineffectively and we've had campaign codes appended to those destination URLs, we can use the filtering mechanism within Path Analyzer to see exactly what journeys people took around the site from there. So for example, if we do look at a particular profile, just show me those journeys. Maybe that gives us an idea of how we should be targeting them, what kind of journey we want to take them on when they arrive at the site. Perhaps we're looking at some of the campaigns that we've done previously. Where are people falling off? Do we need a better journey to conversion than what we've provided them in the past? So really good data point within Sitecore, data UI within Sitecore to interrogate and help us plan some of our campaigns. All of these UIs as well, when we come back to the end of the process and we start to set up our next campaign, should be referred back to. So when we're talking about campaign management, for example, we're looking at attribution. They all plug into whether a campaign was successful, learnings as to what went right, what went wrong, what impact it had. All of these UIs are helpful for that. So once we've kind of used Sitecore's insight capabilities and analytics, we need to move on to the next step, which is building the campaign. One of the slides that Mario showed earlier was this idea of a flexible template. With some of the customers that we work around campaigns on, we encourage and advocate the creation of a new template within Sitecore. The reason for this is flexibility is going to be key. When we're talking about managing campaigns, there's a lot of grunt work that needs to be done up front, and often our business as marketers is we get more money if we're successful. Sitecore can help us with this in terms of, yes, we'll have a bit of a higher capex cost, an initial outlay in order to create a flexible template and a repository of components. But once we have that, and we have the data strategy in place, we could just keep churning and rolling out campaigns and individualizing them against the segments that we identify. So actually over time, our initial investment is recovered very quickly by our savings. And by this, I mean, let's have a landing page that is flexible enough to look different depending on the type of campaign that we are running. Let's have a repository of components, where it's a video component, a form component, a download component, a links component, whatever it might be. Let's have a repository of those that we can drop into the landing page template from wherever we want, and then let's reuse that. Let's become quicker, more efficient. Let's do more campaigning rather than running a campaign, doing a post-mortem on it, and then spending 6 months to a year to get budget to create it all again. It costing us an awful lot of money each time. We can be more efficient within Sitecore because of the object-based nature of the CMS. And don't forget campaign codes. briefly mentioned earlier about campaign codes and how we can create campaigns, we can assign them to facets and group them within the Sitecore marketing control panel. Campaign codes form an incredibly important part of everything that we do within Sitecore, especially if you're driving traffic to the website. Firstly, because from a data point of view, we can successfully attribute the success of a campaign channel by its campaign type. What did social drive? And if social drove X amount of visits, what value did it do? What did this particular PPC campaign do when people arrived at the site? How many of them went on to convert? What journeys did they take? Did they trigger any micro goals that weren't actually the ultimate conversion that we wanted? It gives us a granular insight into how successful campaigns are. So they're very important. The other thing is that campaign codes are used as a trigger point within Sitecore as well. So we can identify the inbound referral from a user and do something with that information. The first thing that springs to mind would be we're personalizing. We're personalizing off a campaign, that flexible template again. We're personalizing that landing page based on the type of campaign that they're arriving from. But also we can use it to trigger off a engagement plan. And we can automate then a lot of the journey they're going to have with us as an organization or as a brand. So campaign codes are massively important. Don't forget them. Make sure you're employing them. Do it in conjunction with whatever you're doing within Google Analytics as well. But please don't forget those. And then we can use personalization. We've had it mapped out. We've done all the planning. We've got our kind of our setup, our map in place. We've understood what our users want, how they want to be treated, and we can use personalization to drive them toward conversion. That's the kind of mindset that most users will have, and most marketers will have, that we're driving people using personalization towards a conversion. There is actually a sort of side value to personalization within campaign management as well, in that if people fall off the golden path, we can use personalization to direct them back to it, all based around the fact that we can create a rule that says if the campaign code has been triggered within this session or a previous session, we're going to treat that user in this way. So make sure we're mapping our personalization activities and what we're creating back towards the campaign and the individual goals, or the planning stuff that Mario was talking about earlier. And then we can use automation to help users through a journey. Again, we can have this kicked off either by a campaign code, so we put them into a bucket and then we enroll them in an engagement plan, or perhaps once they've done the required transaction, they've given us some data, they filled out a form, for example, maybe we kick off an engagement plan there. Typically within Sitecore, engagement plans or marketing automation is viewed and demoed with a mindset of we're going to send some automated emails. Not strictly true, and quite restrictive of what it can do. Of course, from a 2-point sort of stage engagement plan, we can say they filled out a form, we send an automated email. Did they open an email? Yes or no? Okay, if they did, then we're going to send this follow-up email. If they didn't, we're going to send this type of email. Very simple kind of use of automation within Sitecore, but it can be a bit more complex in that we can start to use automation, create automation plans that can move people through various states. So if they arrived via a campaign code, for example, did they do this type of activity? If they did, then we're showing them this piece of personalized content. If we get really smart, we can say, well, we're going to wait a week and trigger off a social advertising piece within their feed if we've got that level of integration, or we're going to update CRM, or we're going to trigger off a sales call to happen, or maybe if we're tied into big print marketing, we're going to send out a leaflet or whatever it might be through the letterbox. Depends how serious we are about our campaigns, but it doesn't have to be simply email triggering. We can move people through states in just their web journey. So consider using automation as well. This is having a big revamp in version 9, and there's going to get quite a lot of attention from 9.1 and onwards as well, both in the UI and the underlying architecture. So it's going to become very sophisticated in how we can move groups of visitors through a plan rather than just an individual. What happens after the campaign? This is less sort of Sitecore and more returning to where we started. When we have this campaign created and we're using Sitecore as our tool to manage our end-to-end campaigns, we'd have already set up the template. We'd have already got the data points in place, the data foundation. We'd have already got some personalization rules running and components. So we have the ability to just rinse and repeat and go through the process again really quickly, create efficiencies within the organization, and really start to provide value from the Sitecore platform back to a business that may be struggling to see that return on investment from what is quite an expensive product. So here we have a happy group of people looking at a postmortem, and I implore you to really look back at the campaign activity you have done, what worked, what didn't work, what had a positive impact about what we wanted to achieve and what didn't. Do we need to create more goals? Does the engagement value need tweaking to a degree? Are we not sort of tracking in a way that we should? Be careful with tweaking engagement value too much, because obviously it will start to skew results. Did the personalization activity that we put as part of the game actually have an impact when we deployed it with a test? And then revisit those interrogation points that we have within Sitecore through the various UIs. Filter the path analyzer based on that campaign that you ran, and see where people dropped off, what journeys they went. Was it too complex? Do we need to refine that journey slightly, and learn from that? Go back to the experience dashboards and start to look at, well, what value was driven from Sitecore from that particular campaign? What goals were triggered? Did they reach a particular threshold that we'd set out as our KPIs in our planning stage? And look at the experience profile if we're looking at an individual user. And more importantly, don't be afraid to think differently and go and query the database directly if there's something specific that you wanted to know. Okay, I mean, that's it. We try and keep these things nice and quick and nice and to the point. So we hope you found it useful. Have you got any questions that have come through at all? If not, please do not hesitate to get in touch with us through the website or through some of our details. Okay, guys. Well, thank you very much. Have a great afternoon. We'll be sending around a follow-up email with a recording as well. And don't forget, Mary mentioned about this delivering hyper-personalization workshop that we've got coming up next week. This is a lot more interactive. It's taking some of this content and expanding it a little bit more. So sign up for that, come along, and we'll look at this in a lot more detail. Thanks very much. Bye.